The sound of galloping hooves died against the roaring of the Cumberland River, swollen from spring rains, as Lila Prescott clutched desperately at the reins of her panicked horse. The normally placid crossing had become a death trap overnight, and she realized her mistake too late as the current swept the animal's legs from under it, plunging both horse and rider into the churning water. Samuel Reed spotted the disaster from the ridge above. He'd been tracking strays from the Triple R ranch when the woman's scream cut through the April air like a knife. Without hesitation, he spurred his stallion down the embankment, dismounting at the riverside and tethering the animal to a young cottonwood. The woman was already 50 yards downstream, her blue dress billowing around her like a strange flower as the current dragged her under, then thrust her back up. Samuel shed his coat and boots in seconds, diving into the frigid water with practiced efficiency. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, but years working cattle drives across treacherous rivers had taught him to fight through the shock. He swam with powerful strokes, angling downstream to intercept the woman's trajectory. She disappeared beneath the surface again just as he neared her. Samuel dove, forcing his eyes open against the murky water. His lungs burned as he searched, finally glimpsing the pale blue fabric swirling in the current. He grabbed hold, wrapping his arm around her waist and kicking hard toward the surface. They broke through together, Samuel gasping for air while the woman hung limp in his grasp. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue. The nearest bank was still 30 yards away, but a fallen tree extended into the water just ahead. With one arm locked around her chest, Samuel used his free arm to swim toward the makeshift lifeline. His muscles screamed in protest as he hauled them both onto the half-submerged trunk. The woman wasn't breathing. Samuel dragged her further up onto the bank, laying her flat on her back. Her dark hair was plastered against her deathly pale face, her eyes closed. Without hesitation, he tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and sealed his mouth over hers, forcing air into her lungs. Nothing. He tried again, pressing harder on her chest before breathing into her mouth a second time. Still nothing. Samuel worked mechanically, refusing to acknowledge the growing dread in his stomach. 1 breath. 2. 3. He had seen drowning victims saved before, but only if you reached them in time. "Come on," he muttered, pressing down on her chest again. "Breathe, damn it." As if in answer to his command, the woman suddenly convulsed, water spewing from her mouth as she coughed violently. Samuel quickly turned her onto her side, supporting her as she expelled river water from her lungs. When the coughing subsided, she drew a shuddering breath, and her eyes fluttered open, bright green eyes that fixed on his face with bewildered gratitude. "You're all right now," Samuel said, his voice gruff with relief. "Just keep breathing." She tried to speak but could only manage another coughing fit. Samuel removed his soaked shirt, wringing it out before wrapping it around her shoulders for what little warmth it might provide. The April sun was strong, but the wind had a bite to it, and they were both soaked to the bone. "My horse," she finally whispered. Samuel glanced downstream. "I don't see it. Might have made it to shore further down." "Willow," she said, her voice raspy. "Her name is Willow." "I'll look for her once you're safe," he promised. "Can you stand? We need to get you warm." With his support, she managed to get to her feet, though she swayed dangerously. Samuel steadied her, noting how small she seemed beside his 6-foot frame. "I'm Samuel Reed," he said. "From the Triple R, about 5 miles east of here." "Lila Prescott," she replied, teeth chattering. "I was heading to Coopersville. My uncle's expecting me." Samuel nodded. "Coopersville's 10 miles west. You're lucky I was tracking strays nearby." He whistled sharply, and moments later his horse appeared on the ridge. "Can you make it up there? I've got a bedroll and some dry clothes in my saddlebag." The climb was slow, with Lila leaning heavily against him. Twice she stumbled, and by the time they reached his horse, her lips were blue again from cold. Samuel retrieved the bedroll and spread it on a patch of sun-warmed grass. "Here," he said, handing her his spare shirt and denims. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. I'll turn my back." He moved away, giving her privacy while he assessed their situation. The Cumberland was too dangerous to cross here. They'd have to head north to the bridge at Miller's Crossing. That would add hours to their journey, and Lila Prescott was in no condition to travel far. "Mr. Reed." Samuel turned to find her standing uncertainly in his clothes. The shirt hung nearly to her knees, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. She'd tied his bandana around her waist to keep the denims from sliding off. Her dark hair was beginning to dry in waves around her face, making her look younger than he'd initially thought, though certainly not a child. 20, perhaps, or a few years more. "Thank you," she said simply. "For saving my life," Samuel nodded. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she countered, a surprising firmness in her voice. "They wouldn't have. Most men wouldn't have risked themselves for a stranger." He looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "We should get moving. There's a trapper's cabin about 3 miles from here. We can dry out properly there, and you can rest before we head to Coopersville." Lila took a step forward and winced, lifting one foot to reveal a bloodied sole. "You've cut yourself," Samuel observed, kneeling to examine her foot. A deep gash ran across her heel, likely from a rock during their struggle in the river. "This needs cleaning and bandaging." Without asking permission, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his horse. She was too light, he thought, and she smelled of river water and something faintly floral beneath it. Samuel placed her carefully in the saddle before mounting behind her. "I can ride behind you," she protested weakly. "With that foot? Not a chance, Miss Prescott. Besides, you're still too weak from nearly drowning." She didn't argue further, which confirmed his suspicion that she was worse off than she wanted to admit. As they rode, she gradually leaned back against his chest, her body seeking warmth. Samuel kept one arm around her waist to steady her, aware of her every breath, each one a reminder of how close she'd come to having none at all. The trapper's cabin was just as he remembered it, a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace and crude furnishings. Samuel had used it occasionally during hunting trips, and while basic, it offered shelter and a place to dry out. He helped Lila inside and settled her on the single cot before starting a fire. The cabin slowly warmed as flames licked at the dry wood. Samuel found the medical supplies he knew were kept in a tin above the fireplace: whiskey, clean bandages, and a needle and thread. "This will hurt," he warned as he knelt by her injured foot. "The whiskey will clean it, but it'll sting something fierce." Lila nodded, bracing herself. When the liquor touched her wound, she bit her lip to stifle a cry, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the cot. "You're doing fine," Samuel murmured, his hands steady as he cleaned the cut. "It's deep but clean. I'll need to stitch it." "Have you done this before?" she asked, watching him thread the needle. "A few times. Mostly on myself, once or twice on ranch hands." He glanced up at her. "I'll be quick." True to his word, Samuel worked efficiently, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Lila flinched with each pass of the needle but made no sound. When he finished, he wrapped her foot in clean bandages and sat back on his heels. "You're braver than most cowboys I know," he said, offering a rare smile. "Necessity," she replied with a small shrug. "When you grow up with 4 brothers, you learn not to show weakness." Samuel moved to the fireplace, hanging their wet clothes on a makeshift line to dry. 4 brothers, that explains a lot." "Does it?" Lila shifted on the cot, pulling his spare blanket around her shoulders. "You didn't panic in the water," he observed. "Most people would have." "Oh, I panicked," she admitted. "Just not out loud. My brothers taught me that thrashing only makes you sink faster." They fell into a comfortable silence as the fire crackled. Outside, the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting golden light through the cabin's single window. Samuel busied himself preparing a simple meal from the supplies in his saddlebag jerky, hard biscuits and coffee. "I need to find Willow," Lila said suddenly. "She was my father's horse before he passed. She's all I have left of him." Samuel handed her a tin cup of coffee. "We'll look for her tomorrow. The river follows a bend about a mile downstream. If she made it to shore, that's where she'd likely come out. You know this area well." "I've been working the Triple R for 5 years now," he explained. "Before that, I was a drover, taking cattle from Texas to Kansas. Learned every river crossing and water hole from the Rio Grande to the Missouri." Lila studied him over the rim of her cup. "You don't sound like you're from Texas." "Pennsylvania originally," Samuel admitted. "Left home at 16, headed west, never looked back." "What made you stay here, in Tennessee?" Samuel considered her question. "Land mostly. It's good country, the mountains, the valleys. It gets in your blood." He paused. "What about you?" "Coopersville your home," Lila shook her head. "I'm from Louisville. After my father died last winter, my uncle offered me a place to stay. He owns the general store in Coopersville." "William Prescott?" Samuel asked, recognition dawning. "You know him." "Everyone knows Will Prescott." "Good man. Fair prices." He didn't add what else everyone knew, that Will Prescott had a reputation for trying to marry off any female relative who crossed his threshold. Samuel had heard him boasting just weeks ago about his niece coming to town, and how he'd have her matched with one of the local boys before summer. Looking at Lila now, her delicate features, intelligent eyes, and determined chin, Samuel felt an unexpected pang of something like protectiveness. She deserved better than being bartered off by a well-meaning but interfering uncle. As night fell, Samuel insisted Lila keep the cot while he made a pallet by the fire. Despite her protests, he could see exhaustion etched in the lines of her face. The ordeal in the river had taken more from her than she wanted to admit. "Sleep," he told her. "We'll head out at first light." Lila wanted to argue but found she couldn't keep her eyes open. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Samuel Reed's broad shoulders silhouetted against the firelight, his profile strong and watchful in the dancing shadows. She dreamed of water cold, relentless water pulling her down into darkness. In the dream, she fought and struggled until strong arms encircled her, drawing her toward light and air. When she woke with a gasp shortly before dawn, those same arms were around her. "Easy," Samuel murmured, his voice low and soothing. "You're safe. It was just a dream." Lila realized she was sitting upright, Samuel beside her on the cot, one arm supporting her back. She must have cried out in her sleep. "I was drowning again," she whispered. "But you didn't," he reminded her. "You're here." In the dim light of the dying fire, his face was softer, less guarded than it had been during the day. Lila was suddenly very aware of his closeness, of the strength in the arm that held her. "Because of you," she said. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the fragile thread that now connected their lives. Samuel cleared his throat and withdrew his arm, standing to stoke the fire back to life. "Dawn's coming," he said. "We should get moving if we want to look for your horse before heading to Coopersville." They ate a quick breakfast as the first light filtered through the trees. Lila's clothes had dried overnight, though they were badly wrinkled and still bore stains from the river. She changed behind a blanket Samuel hung for privacy, grateful to be back in her own attire despite its condition. Her injured foot throbbed when she put weight on it, but Samuel had fashioned a crude crutch from a forked branch, which helped. Outside, the morning was clear and cool. birds singing in the surrounding forest as if yesterday's drama had never occurred. Samuel lifted Lila onto his horse with ease before mounting behind her. They rode first to the bend in the river he had mentioned, following the bank downstream in search of Willow. There, Lila pointed suddenly. About a quarter-mile ahead, a pale gray horse grazed peacefully in a small clearing by the riverbank. Samuel felt Lila's body tense with excitement as they approached. The mare lifted her head, ears forward, then nickered in recognition as Lila called her name. Aside from some scratches and a slight limp, the horse appeared unharmed. "She's a survivor," Samuel observed as Lila slid from the saddle to embrace her horse's neck. Like her mistress, Lila pressed her cheek against Willow's mane, blinking back tears of relief. "My father always said she was the smartest horse he ever owned." They examined Willow's injuries, minor cuts, and a strained muscle in her right foreleg. Nothing serious, but enough that riding her would be unwise. "We'll walk her," Samuel decided. "It's only about 8 miles to Coopersville from here if we take the Ridge Trail." The journey was slow, with frequent stops to rest both Lila's foot and Willow's leg. Samuel led his stallion with one hand and supported Lila with the other when the terrain grew difficult. They talked as they traveled about Samuel's life on the ranch, about Lila's childhood in Louisville, about books they'd read and places they'd seen. By midday, Samuel realized he'd told Lila more about himself than he'd shared with anyone in years. There was something about her that invited confidence, a genuineness, an absence of judgment that made words come easily. "What will you do in Coopersville?" he asked as they stopped to rest in the shade of an old oak. Lila hesitated. "My uncle says there are opportunities for a young woman with education. I taught school in Louisville for a time." "Coopersville could use a schoolteacher," Samuel agreed. "The children there get their learning in fits and starts whenever a circuit teacher passes through." "And you?" Lila asked. "Will you always work the Triple R?" Samuel gazed toward the distant mountains. "I've been saving. Another year or two I might have enough to buy a small spread of my own." "Is that your dream? Your own ranch?" "A simple one," he admitted. "Land, cattle, a house built with my own hands." He glanced at her, then away. "Most would call it ordinary." "I don't think so," Lila said quietly. "Having something that's truly yours, that you've worked for, there's nothing ordinary about that." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Samuel allowed himself to imagine Lila in that unbuilt house, her presence filling rooms that existed only in his mind. The thought came unbidden and unsettled him with its clarity. They reached the outskirts of Coopersville as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. The town was smaller than Lila had expected, a single street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple visible at the far end, a few houses scattered beyond. William Prescott's general store sat prominently at the center of town, with living quarters attached at the back. As they approached, a stocky man with graying hair emerged onto the porch, peering anxiously down the road. "Uncle Will," Lila called. The man turned, his face lighting with relief as he hurried toward them. "Lila, thank God, we've been worried sick. You were due yesterday." "There was an accident," she began, but her uncle was already taking her arm, helping her toward the store. "You're limping. And your dress, what happened?" He looked suspiciously at Samuel. "Who's this?" "This is Mr. Samuel Reed," Lila said firmly. "He saved my life when I nearly drowned trying to cross the Cumberland." William Prescott's expression shifted instantly from suspicion to gratitude. "The Cumberland. Good Lord, girl, why didn't you take the bridge at Miller's Crossing?" "I didn't know the river would be so high," Lila admitted. "Willow lost her footing and we were swept away. If Mr. Reed hadn't been there." She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. William extended his hand to Samuel. "I'm in your debt, sir, truly." Samuel accepted the handshake with a nod. Anyone would have done the same. "Nonsense," William insisted. "You must stay for supper. My wife will want to thank you properly." Samuel glanced at Lila, noting the fatigue in her eyes despite her composed expression. "Thank you, but I should get back to the Triple R. They'll be wondering where I am." "At least let us pay you for your trouble," William offered, reaching for his wallet. "No," Samuel said sharply, then softened his tone. "No payment necessary." Lila stepped forward, ignoring her uncle's steadying hand. "Will you come to town again soon, Mr. Reed? I'd like to properly thank you when I'm not half drowned and exhausted." There was something in her eyes, a question, an invitation perhaps, that made Samuel pause. "The Triple R does business with your uncle's store. I'm sure our paths will cross again, Miss Prescott." With a final nod to them both, Samuel mounted his horse and led Willow toward the livery stable, where he would arrange for her care until she was fully healed. As he rode away, he could feel Lila's gaze following him. 3 weeks passed before Samuel returned to Coopersville. Spring had fully taken hold of the countryside, wildflowers dotting the meadows, trees dressed in new leaves. He had legitimate ranch business supplies needed ordering, mail to collect, but Samuel knew those were merely excuses. The bell above the general store's door announced his arrival. William Prescott looked up from behind the counter, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Reed, good to see you again. What can I do for you today?" Samuel handed over his list of supplies. As William began gathering the items, the rear door opened and Lila appeared, carrying a stack of ledger books. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair neatly pinned up, and she moved without any sign of her previous injury. She stopped when she saw him, a smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Reed, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about Coopersville. Ranch work," he explained. "Spring's our busiest time." William looked between them with obvious interest. "Lila's been a godsend, helping me organize the books. Turns out she has quite a head for numbers." "Uncle," Lila said, a warning in her voice that made Samuel hide a smile. "Well, I'll just take these supplies out back and make up your order, Mr. Reed," William said, not quite subtle enough in his hasty departure. When they were alone, Lila set down the ledgers and approached. "Your timing is fortunate. I was planning to ride out to the Triple R tomorrow." "Oh," Samuel tried to keep his tone casual. "To check on Willow," she explained. "Mr. Thompson at the livery says she's fully recovered, but I wanted to test her leg on a short ride before taking her home." "She's a good horse," Samuel agreed. "Strong-willed, like her owner," Lila said with a small smile. "I also wanted to see you again, Mr. Reed, to thank you properly." "Samuel," he corrected. "After pulling someone from a river, I think first names are appropriate." "Samuel, then," she said, his name sounding different in her voice, somehow more significant. "And I'm Lila. How's your foot healing?" "Well enough that Uncle can't use it as an excuse to keep me in the store all day anymore," she said with a laugh. "I've started teaching some of the local children in the afternoons. The town council is considering establishing a proper school by fall." "That's good news," Samuel said, genuinely pleased for her. "You've settled in quickly." Lila nodded. "It's a good community. Though I admit I miss the open country sometimes. In Louisville, I could at least ride in the parks." She hesitated. "Perhaps, if you're not too busy with ranch work, you might show me some of the safer trails around here." The invitation hung between them, simple on the surface but layered with unspoken meaning. Samuel found himself nodding before he'd fully considered what he was agreeing to. "Tomorrow," he said, "I could meet you at the livery around noon. We could test Willow's leg and I could show you Thunder Ridge. The view's worth the ride." "I'd like that," Lila replied, her eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary. The store bell jingled as new customers entered, breaking the moment. With a nod, Samuel stepped back, allowing Lila to attend to the newcomers. As he waited for William to return with his supplies, he watched her easy manner with the customers, the graceful way she moved between the shelves, the occasional glance she cast in his direction when she thought he wasn't looking. The next day dawned clear and warm. Samuel arrived at the livery early, taking time to check Willow over himself before Lila arrived. The mare seemed fully recovered, greeting him with a gentle nudge that suggested she remembered his role in her rescue. Lila appeared precisely at noon, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided and pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She carried a small satchel that she secured to Willow's saddle. "Lunch," she explained, catching his curious glance. "I thought we might get hungry." They rode out of town side by side, following a well-worn trail that wound through meadows bright with spring flowers before climbing gradually into the foothills. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they traveled a rock formation shaped like a bear's head, a creek known for its trout, the distant smoke from the Triple Articus main house. Willow showed no signs of lameness, keeping pace easily with Samuel's stallion. Lila rode with confidence, her posture relaxed yet alert, occasionally leaning down to pat her horse's neck with obvious affection. "You ride well," Samuel observed. "My father insisted all his children learn, daughters included," she replied. "He said a person never knows when they might need to make a quick exit. Wise man." "He was," Lila agreed, a touch of sadness coloring her voice. "He would have liked you, I think. He valued directness and capability." They reached Thunder Ridge just after 1 o'clock. The outcropping of rock offered a sweeping view of the valley below the Cumberland, winding like a silver ribbon through green pastures, distant mountains rising blue-hazed on the horizon. Samuel helped Lila dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They spread a blanket on a flat stretch of sun-warmed stone and unpacked the lunch she'd brought: fried chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a jug of sweet tea. "This is magnificent," Lila said, gesturing toward the view as they ate. "I can see why you love this country." "It grows on you," Samuel agreed. "First time I saw these mountains, I knew I'd found home." "I felt something similar when I arrived in Coopersville," Lila admitted. "Despite the circumstances." Samuel glanced at her. "Your uncle seems eager to see you settled." "You noticed," Lila said dryly. "He's introduced me to every unmarried man within 20 miles. "Any prospects?" Samuel asked, trying to sound casual and failing. Lila turned to face him fully, her green eyes direct and challenging. "One, perhaps, though he's been frustratingly slow to declare himself." Samuel set down his biscuit, suddenly not hungry. A cautious man might worry about a woman feeling obligated because he happened to be in the right place at the right time. A perceptive man might realize that near-death experiences have a way of clarifying what's truly important, she countered. And that gratitude and affection are not the same thing, though they can exist simultaneously. "Is that what you feel? Affection? Would I be here if I didn't?" The directness of her question startled a laugh from him. "Your father was right about you being straightforward." "Life's too short for anything else," Lila said simply. "The river taught me that." Samuel looked out across the valley, gathering his thoughts. When he turned back to her, his expression was serious. "I don't have much to offer beyond what you see," he said. "I work hard, save what I can, dream of my own land someday. It's a simple life." "I'm not looking for anything grand," Lila replied. "Just honest, real." Samuel reached across the blanket, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were slender but strong, fitting naturally within his larger grasp. "When I pulled you from that river," he said quietly, "something changed for me, watching you fight to breathe again. It was like I was holding my own future in my arms, not knowing if it would live or die." Lila's eyes softened. "For me, it was waking up to find you still there. Not just the rescue, but the care afterward. The way you looked at me not as something broken to be fixed, but as someone worth protecting." "You are," Samuel said firmly. "Worth protecting, worth knowing, worth—" He hesitated, then finished simply, "worth loving." The word hung between them, new and fragile, yet somehow inevitable. Lila moved closer until their shoulders touched, her face upturned to his. "The river tried to claim me," she whispered, "but you wouldn't allow it." Samuel lifted his hand to her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. "I didn't say anything at the time, couldn't. I was too afraid you wouldn't take that next breath. But I did," Lila reminded him, "because of you." When their lips met, it felt to Samuel like the completion of something that had begun the moment he'd spotted her in the water, a recognition, a homecoming. Lila's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened, became a promise of all that might lie ahead. They spent the afternoon on Thunder Ridge, talking, planning, dreaming aloud. Samuel spoke of the land he'd been eyeing, a small valley with good water and pasture, not far from Coopersville. Lila described the school she hoped to establish, a proper building with books and slates for every child. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, they reluctantly packed up the remains of their lunch and mounted their horses for the return journey. "Will you come to supper on Sunday?" Lila asked as they neared the town. "Meet my aunt properly. She's been curious about you since Uncle Will told her what happened." "Should I be prepared for an interrogation?" Samuel asked, only half joking. "Absolutely," Lila confirmed with a laugh. "Aunt Martha believes in knowing exactly who's calling on her niece." "And what would you like me to tell her about my intentions?" Lila reined Willow to a stop, turning to face him fully. "The truth," Samuel read, "that we've both been given a second chance at life and we intend to make the most of it, together." 6 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, Samuel and Lila were married in the newly built Coopersville schoolhouse. William Prescott walked his niece down the aisle between rows of benches filled with townspeople, ranch hands, and students. Willow and Samuel's stallion were tethered outside, festooned with ribbons for the occasion. As they exchanged vows before the traveling minister, Samuel thought of that day by the river, how close he'd come to never knowing this woman, this life they were building. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with a reverence that spoke of that knowledge, of the precious gift they'd been given. The following spring found them settled on Samuel's land, 20 acres of valley and hillside, with a sturdy cabin he'd built through the winter with help from neighboring ranchers. Lila continued teaching at the Coopersville school 3 days a week, riding Willow along the now familiar trails between their home and town. On warm evenings, they would sit together on the porch Samuel had added to the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. Sometimes they spoke of the future of children they hoped for, of the ranch they were building together, of the school that was flourishing under Lila's care. Other times, they simply sat in comfortable silence, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, both grateful for the river that had nearly separated them forever, but instead had bound their lives together with unbreakable threads of love and second chances.